All right, get your pint, pull up a stool, because this one's been sitting in my drafts folder for about 3 years, and I've finally got the nerve to say it out loud in front of people. Welcome back to Beyond the Rings, the channel where we don't explain who Sauron is. We don't explain what the One Ring does, because if you're here, you already know, and if you don't, mate, welcome to the deep end. We're not slowing down for you today. This is the channel for the ones who own 3 different printings of the Silmarillion, because the maps are slightly different in each. The ones who have opinions about whether Christopher Tolkien should have published Morgoth's Ring as 12 separate volumes or crammed it all into one brick, and the ones who get genuinely annoyed when a Peter Jackson extended edition featurette calls Tom Bombadil a bit of a curiosity, like he's a novelty act, instead of one of the single most destabilizing beings his father ever wrote into existence. So today we're doing something I've wanted to do since I first read Letter 44, sitting in a university library instead of finishing an essay that was actually due. We're talking about a meeting that never happened on the page, not once. Not in a footnote, not in a draft, not in a scrap of paper Christopher found under his father's floorboards. I'm talking about Tom Bombadil and Ungoliant standing in the same space before she does the thing she's famous for, before the 2 trees go dark and Valinor learns what real grief looks like. It's not canon. It can't be canon. But I'm going to spend the next while explaining why, if you actually take Tolkien's own metaphysics seriously, instead of treating this like generic fantasy world building, this isn't just a fun what if. It's maybe the single cleanest experiment you could run on the entire cosmology of Arda. 2 beings who don't fit anywhere. Stick them in a room, see what breaks. Let's start with Tom, because everyone thinks they know Tom, and almost nobody actually does. Quick fan cred check before we go further. His boots are yellow, not brown, not black, yellow, with his blue coat and that tall crowned hat with the long feather in it. I bring that up because it's exactly the sort of detail people skip past on their way to the who even is this guy debate. And honestly, the outfit tells you something. He's dressed like a figure out of a nursery rhyme in a book that otherwise dresses its characters like they're heading into a war. That's not decoration, that's Tolkien signaling, visually, before he ever gets around to explaining it in prose, that Tom operates on different rules than everyone else walking through that forest. Now here's where it gets actually interesting. And this is the part people skate past, because the Barrow Downs chapters get treated as a cute detour before the real plot starts at Bree. In letter 144, writing to Naomi Mitchison, Tolkien doesn't just wave vaguely at Tom being mysterious. He gets specific, and the specifics matter more than the mystery. He frames Tom as representing a particular kind of way of being, someone with zero interest in possessing or dominating anything. Not resists the urge, doesn't have the urge. That's why the ring does nothing to him. Not because he's too powerful to be affected, which is the reading a lot of adaptations lean on, because it's simpler to animate, but because the ring's entire mechanism of seduction is built on desire for control, and Tom's psychology doesn't have a socket for that plug to go into. He's not resisting temptation. He's outside the category temptation operates in. That's a very different, and honestly much stranger, kind of power than he's basically a god who could squash Sauron if he felt like it. Which is the fan theory that gets thrown around and which, respectfully, misses the entire point Tolkien was making. And this is also why Jackson leaving him out of the films, whatever else you think about that decision, was at least an intellectually honest one, even if it broke 1,000 hearts in the process. Tom doesn't function in a plot. He functions as a philosophical pressure test on the story's central object. You can't cut him into an action sequence because he doesn't want anything, and wanting things is what drives every scene in that trilogy. Rings of Power, for what it's worth, seem to understand this on some level. There was a stretch of fan theorizing that the stranger might actually be Tom, and when the show eventually revealed him as one of the Astari instead, a chunk of the fandom was disappointed. But honestly, I think that was the correct call, because the second you give Tom a face in live action and a mission, you've already turned him into something he explicitly isn't in the text. He's not on a mission, He's the one character in the Legendarium who gets to just exist. Here's the detail that actually breaks the geography of any premise like this one, though, and I want to be upfront about it rather than pretend it isn't a problem, because glossing over inconvenient canon is exactly the kind of lazy fan content this channel exists to make fun of. Tolkien is explicit, again in that same letter, that Tom is bound, rooted even to a specific and honestly shrinking patch of land around the Old Forest and the Withywindle. He doesn't roam Middle-earth, let alone Aman. Goldberry herself tells the hobbits, in terms that don't leave a lot of wiggle room, that his domain ends at the boundary he's drawn around himself. So if you're picturing this premise as Tom literally strolling into Valinor for a chat with a giant spider demon before catching the last ferry home, you've already lost the plot, and worse, you've turned one of Tolkien's most carefully unexplained characters into a tourist. So how do you get him there? You've got two honest options, and I think both are defensible if you're actually working from the text instead of just wanting a cool crossover fight. Option 1. Tom's awareness doesn't work like ours, and it doesn't need to, because remember, he predates the trees, predates the rivers, was around, by his own account, before the seas were bent, which puts him in extremely strange company. That's not Hobbit-tier knowledge. That's the kind of claim the text usually reserves for the Ainur, the beings who were literally present at the music that shaped the world before the world existed. The Valar sense Melgor's evil from vast distances, not because they're physically nearby, but because their nature is woven into the fabric of itself. If Tom's nature runs on a similar, if smaller and more localized, frequency, then meeting Ungoliant doesn't require him to move an inch. It requires him to notice, the way you'd notice a change in weather you can't yet see, except the weather is a wound being torn into the fundamental light of the world. Option 2, and this is the one I personally find more compelling, is that the meeting isn't physical at all, in the two bodies occupy the same coordinates sense. Remember what happens to Frodo in the Barrow Downs, and again inside Tom's own house. There's a dream logic quality to how time and perception behave around him. Frodo sees visions that aren't strictly happening in front of him, but are somehow real within that space. If Tom's home operates on that same principle, dilated, permeable, not fully obedient to ordinary sequence, then a meeting with Ungoliant could occur in exactly that liminal register, song-mediated, half dream, half perception, the kind of thing that would never show up in a straightforward historical account because it never happened in a way history's vocabulary is built to describe. Either reading, notice, forces you to actually engage with what Tolkien meant by leaving Tom's limits undefined. Instead of treating the ambiguity as a gap you're free to just paper over with a teleport spell. Right, pint's going warm. Let's get into her now. Because Ungoliant does not get nearly enough respect in this fandom relative to how genuinely unsettling she is. Once you go past the surface level, big spider ate the trees, sad summary most people carry around. Here's the thing nobody wants to sit with. Her origin is one of the biggest unresolved messes in the entire Legendarium, and I mean that as the highest compliment I can pay a piece of world building. Christopher Tolkien, putting together the published Silmarillion, had to pick a version and commit to it. Because a published book needs a spine, it can't sit there shrugging at the reader. But his father never actually settled the question. Go dig into Morgoth's ring, specifically the essays gathered under Myths Transformed. And if you haven't read those, close this video, go buy the book, come back, and you'll find drafts where Ungoliant is framed as a corrupted Maya, one of the lesser spirits who threw in with Melkor, not out of loyalty or shared ideology, but out of shared appetite, two predators recognizing each other. And then you'll find other drafts, arguably later ones, where she's not corrupted by Melkor at all. She's older, she's from outside, from the void beyond Eär's borders, and Melkor didn't make her, he simply found her and had the sense, or the desperation, to use her. That's not a footnote-level discrepancy. That's a fork in the road that changes what she fundamentally is. If she's a fallen Maya, then whatever she's become is a corruption story. Same category as Sauron, same category as the Balrogs, a being who started within Eru's design and was twisted away from it. But if she's from outside, if she predates or exists parallel to Melkor's fall entirely, then she was never part of the music of the Ainur to begin with. She's not corrupted, she's a whole. Something the song simply doesn't account for, sitting inside a universe that was supposedly sung into existence in its entirety. And that distinction, whether you go with fallen or outside, is exactly the kind of contradiction this channel lives for, because it means the horror of the Darkening of Valinor isn't just evil did a bad thing, it's the fundamental architecture of the cosmos might have a blind spot, and nobody, not even the Valar sitting right there in Aman, saw it coming until the light was already gone. And can we talk for a second about how the published Silmarillion describes her darkness? Not as an absence of light, which would be the boring, expected way to write it, but as something that actively devours light, that consumes it the way you'd consume food. That's a genuinely upsetting bit of theology if you think about it for more than 5 seconds, because the entire cosmology up to that point has been built on the premise that light equals goodness, equals the visible signature of Eru's will moving through the world. Ungoliant isn't opposing that signature, she's eating it. There's a difference between a villain who wants to rule the world and a force that treats the world's own life source as a meal, and Tolkien, to his enormous credit, wrote the second scarier thing. Now, and I say this as someone who mostly enjoyed Rings of Power, don't at me. The show mostly left her alone, and I actually think that was the smart move, maybe the smartest structural decision in the whole first 2 seasons. Giving her a tidy backstory, a clean motivation, a face-to-face scene with a clear, here's why she's like this, would have flattened exactly the ambiguity that makes her worth discussing 3/4 of a century after the fact. Some mysteries survive Peter Jackson leaving out Bombadil. Some mysteries survive an entire streaming series choosing restraint. Ungoliant, so far, has survived both, and honestly, long may that continue. So here's where the two of them actually meet, conceptually. And this is the part where I think this premise stops being a fun what-if and starts being a genuinely useful lens on how Tolkien's whole moral universe is built. You've got Tom, who wants nothing. Not knowledge, not beauty for the sake of owning it, not power, not even really company beyond Goldberry and the small bounded joy of his own patch of the world. And you've got Ungoliant, whose hunger is explicitly, repeatedly, described as bottomless. She doesn't just eat the trees, she drinks Melkor's own stolen light afterward. And in some of the later, darker drafts, there's even the suggestion she'd have turned on Melkor himself and devoured him too, if he hadn't fled with the other spiders on his tail. That's not metaphorical greed. That's an appetite with no flaw, and, more unsettlingly, no ceiling either. Put those two next to each other and you're not looking at a fight. If you're the kind of script that stages this as a clash of powers, a who would win YouTube comment bait scenario, you fundamentally misunderstood what makes this pairing interesting in the first place. What you're actually looking at is the widest possible spread of desire the Legendarium has to offer, laid out side by side. Absolute craving on one end, absolute contentment on the other, and the real question isn't who's stronger. It's whether Tom's power, which is entirely vocal, entirely a matter of song commanding the world around him, the way he commands Old Man Willow or the Barrow Wight, has any purchase on a being who was maybe never inside the music to begin with. If Ungoliant really is from outside, if she never had a place in the Ainur original pattern, then Tom's song, his one tool, the only weapon this character has ever needed, might simply do nothing, might pass right through her like sound through a vacuum. And that's the properly unsettling implication buried in this whole premise. Not that Bombadil could stop her, but that he might be the one being in all of Arda actually equipped to notice exactly what she is, exactly how far outside the design she sits, and be completely unable to do a single thing about it except watch and remember, which frankly might be worse. Let's sit with that a second, because I don't think this channel does enough sitting with things before rushing to the next hot take. Imagine the scene properly, not a confrontation, A kind of encounter you'd get in the older mythological traditions Tolkien was drawing on his whole life. Two forces recognizing each other's nature without either one needing to speak first, because speech for Tom is action, and maybe for once in his very long existence, he chooses not to sing, not out of fear. Fear isn't really in his vocabulary either, according to the text, any more than desire is. Out of something closer to recognition that this isn't his fight, his forest, or even, strictly speaking, his cosmos to intervene in. The eldest thing in Middle-earth, standing across from something that might be even older, and for the only time in the entire Legendarium, doing nothing at all. And I think that's the actual payoff of running this thought experiment, the reason it's worth more than a 5-minute forum post. It's not really about Bombadil and Ungoliant as characters colliding. It's about what Tolkien's cosmology looks like when you push it to its two extreme edges simultaneously. The being defined entirely by the absence of want, and the being defined entirely by the presence of an unfillable one, and discover that even a universe built on song, on Eru's flame imperishable, on the idea that everything that exists was sung into being with purpose and place, might still contain two things that were never properly accounted for in that first great performance. One of them just happens to be wearing yellow boots and doesn't seem to mind in the slightest. Before I wrap this one up, quick detour, because I promised myself I'd work this in somewhere, and this is as good a place as any. Think about how differently we'd read the entire Second Era if Tolkien had spent even one paragraph on Gil-galad's actual heraldry, the way he obsessed over Feanor's or the House of Finarfins. We get scraps, we get implication, and that absence shapes how fandom has quietly filled Gil-galad in as this slightly generic last High King, died fighting Sauron, very sad figure, when the man's lineage alone should make him one of the more interesting political knots in the whole Second Age. That's a rant for a different video, but I bring it up because it's the same move as Bombadil and Ungoliant. Honestly, Tolkien leaving a gap, and this fandom's entire reason for existing, forums and letters collecting, and this channel included, being about what we do, responsibly or otherwise, with the gaps he left us. So that's the premise. Not canon, never will be. Don't let anyone in your comments tell you it's confirmed by anything, because it isn't, and if they try to cite a page number for it, ask them which draft, because I guarantee you it moves. But if you've made it this far, you already know that's not really the point. The point is that this Legendarium survives close reading in a way almost nothing else in fantasy does, because every gap, every contradiction Christopher had to sand down for publication, every letter where Tolkien himself admits he doesn't fully know the answer, is an invitation rather than a flaw. Tom Bombadil and Ungoliant never met on the page. But the shape of what a meeting between them would have to look like, if it happened at all, tells you more about how this whole cosmology actually works than 100 pages of straightforward plot summary ever could. That's the pub closing, that's your pint finished, that's this one done. If you've got your own reading on Ungoliant's origin, fallen Maya, or something from outside, I want to hear it, and I want you to bring receipts, page numbers, letter numbers. Don't just vibe at me in the comments. Until next time, this has been Beyond the Rings. Go reread your letters, go bother Christopher's ghost with your unresolved questions, and I'll see you in the next one.